we just got several pretty interesting updates on Cyberpunk 2077. We got a bunch of job listings and even some update branches that may give us a peek at what CD Projekt Red is implementing to this game and a look at their plans for the future of Cyberpunk. This ranging from things like multiplayer functionality, which we of course know about but may be ramping up, to a potential third-person mode properly coming to Cyberpunk, and even something else that I don't see many people talking about with an unannounced project that may in fact be a new Cyberpunk game, and even some of the extended support for mods that CDPR has already been doing. But on that note, one of the biggest questions around Cyberpunk 2077 now is what is next? Patch 1.5 is here, that was the big one, and even since then we've gotten a few smaller updates after patch 1.5, and CDPR has definitely given us some insights as to their vision with Cyberpunk, at least in the shorter term. On their blog, they updated their older "Our Commitment to Quality" post to state, "So what comes next? The plan hasn't changed and involves providing support for Cyberpunk 2077 moving forward, further optimizing the game, resolving issues that might impact the game's performance, stability, and gameplay, and so on. Making sure that each version of the game works best on a given platform will be a driving force in deciding on the scope and range of future updates." This quote's pretty interesting to me, because it describes a pretty clear focus on stability and not necessarily on content, basically saying we are still committed to fixing the game first, and there may be less new features, less new content as a result of that. As well as the last quote with making sure that each version of the game works best on a given platform will be a driving force in deciding the scope and range of future updates is interesting, because I do wonder if this is hinting at a potential problem CDPR is running into. We saw it a bit with patch 1.5, but how some features were actually exclusive to certain consoles. Not talking about next-gen support here, but patch 1.5 had some things not come to the Xbox One and PS4. And yet imagine as they add in more and more complex systems, this will only continue to be a problem. It really seems like at this point, CDPR has squeezed about as much performance as possible out of the Xbox One and PS4 versions of Cyberpunk. Things are way better than they were, but you could still get frame drops relatively easy by messing around on those platforms. But overall, there definitely seems to be this focus on performance and bug fixing, especially in the shorter term, which has been very reflective in the type of content we've been seeing with these past couple of updates after patch 1.5, being smaller and more hot fixes. And on that note, I actually think this may continue. Some of the builds on Steam, whether it be the dev branch or the QA branch, have been getting quite frequent and sometimes significant updates for Cyberpunk. For a while there, before patch 1.5, and even to a lesser degree before patch 1.3, there were fairly large gaps in when these things saw updates on SteamDB. We're talking several months at some point, where now we're rarely going more than a couple of weeks without something getting changed or updated here. This makes me feel like that we could be seeing a more rapid update style, or at least in the near future we'll continue to see these smaller, quicker updates. One of the other interesting things to pop up is job listings at CDPR, and that may suggest a bit about the future of Cyberpunk. One of these job listings potentially suggesting that Cyberpunk 2077 is going to get third-person support. The job listing saying CD Projekt Red Vancouver is looking for a programmer with experience in developing real-time third-person perspective cameras, which basically just means a camera following you around as you play in third person. Basically what you could do with Cyberpunk with mods, or how it works in a vehicle in Cyberpunk already. This would be a huge and long requested feature for this game. It would definitely be a big win with public opinion. And actually, one unforeseen benefit of patch 1.5 is it made the third-person camera mod for Cyberpunk actually work way better. You see, patch 1.5 made several tweaks and overhauls to character movement, and even making it so you're not bald. This will be reflected in your shadow, so your shadow looks better, but even further, if you're actually viewing your character from the third person, like you can with this mod, it just looks way smoother than it did previously. Cyberpunk 2077 is definitely more playable than ever with this mod after patch 1.5, and a lot of that effort is thanks to CD Projekt Red inadvertently. Although as much attention as this job post was getting, I actually had many of you send it over, and I've seen other people covering it already. I think I have to rain on this parade, because the job post itself is for CDPR Vancouver, but it's actually entered in as a Cyberpunk 2077 or the Witcher series. Considering we just had CD Projekt actually make an announcement around a new Witcher game, to me it just seems way more likely that this third-person perspective prospective job posting is for the Witcher game, that being a Witcher Saga or whatever it ends up being called, and not actually around Cyberpunk 2077. Seems unlikely to me that all of a sudden, a year and a half in, they're going to start working on third person. That's not even one of the most interesting job postings. There's actually several other ones that are pretty interesting. We have another multiplayer job listing for Vancouver. That is obviously still a priority and a focus for CD Projekt Red. There's a lead multiplayer designer job listing to support the Molasses Flood. This being a job listing at the core CDPR branch in Warsaw, but actually supporting their Boston studio they recently purchased, but more on that in a moment. And perhaps the most interesting of all are these three job listings categorized under a totally unannounced project. And this seemingly isn't the Witcher game, as many of these job listings are also listed under the Witcher series, which would suggest those are for the Witcher Saga. This is something different, where on one of these unannounced game job listings for a 3D head modeler, it does say CD Projekt Red is looking for a 3D head modeler who would be up to the challenge of creating heads for our expanding Cyberpunk project, which, barring a typo or a misgrouping of this job listing, would suggest that this unannounced project could be something Cyberpunk related. And to be clear, this definitely could just be an error in how this job listing is grouped. It seems like that is fairly likely, but maybe not. We do know right now that the Molasses Flood, which CDPR purchased late last year, is working on something related to an existing CDPR IP, so seemingly either Gwent, The Witcher, or Cyberpunk. It definitely seems like this will be some kind of multiplayer game, as there are a ton of jobs around this. And even in general, we've seen several job listings pop up for CDPR to actually support in development of this game, as if the developers are growing beyond the original studio. Perhaps this is some more evidence that this is some kind of Cyberpunk project, that this is maybe a spin-off game or something else around Cyberpunk. The previous games from the Molasses Flood are definitely a particular art style. It's hard to imagine how Cyberpunk could fit in here, but it definitely could be an interesting combo, or maybe just an all-around switch up, or maybe this is even just around a future Cyberpunk sequel. It was announced last year that CDPR wants to be working on 2 games in tandem going forward. For a while, that was actually Cyberpunk expansions and continued support for Cyberpunk 2077, and seemingly this new Witcher game, but perhaps as some of these Cyberpunk updates will start to get smaller, that'll actually be starting on something else entirely. So overall, I think this makes the future of CD Projekt Red and Cyberpunk 2077 pretty interesting. We obviously have all of this DLC for Cyberpunk. From interviews past, we heard how Cyberpunk should be getting at least as many DLCs as The Witcher 3 got, which means there's a lot of additional content on the way. Despite that, we've only actually gotten 6 DLCs thus far, and it's been a while. It feels like we're due for some more or a more consistent release schedule. We obviously know multiplayer is coming to Cyberpunk. There may even be a second Cyberpunk project in the works at a different studio. We have the 2 major expansions on their way to Cyberpunk. And there's even this curiosity with the mod support around this game. Something CDPR has been doing, in addition to actually hiring modders, is continuing to support mod making ability. With some of the more recent major patches, like patch 1.5 and patch 1.3, they've been updating the metadata file on their modding support tools website. You can see here, it was just updated on March 23rd. And this is required for some of the things that are being changed with the core modding framework, CyberEngine tweaks, and even things like TweakXL and ArchiveXL, which more recently were released. One question that I do have going forward is around the announcement of some of these things, as well as people losing interest. Since patch 1.5, player count has been slowly drifting, which is expected. Single player game, once you complete all the content, you kind of did it. And if anything, to me, it's actually pretty impressive how good the hold has been since patch 1.5, especially with things like Elden Ring coming out in the same time period. But going forward, it almost feels like CDPR is losing their opportunity, in particular with some of these smaller DLCs. We're going to eventually get transmog, or perhaps a couple of other new vehicles or minor things, a couple of new weapons coming to the game. Many of these are already in the files of the game, but after a certain point, it feels like people won't actually come back for that because a lot of time has passed already. We're about a year and a half after release now. As well, CDPR has been taking this approach of actually not announcing things ahead of time anymore. Like with patch 1.5 and of course the next gen patch as a result, we just got it one day. There was no announcement ahead of time. The day they started talking about that was the day it ended up releasing, and it definitely seems like this is building some user frustration because they don't know what to expect. We have no idea when the next expansion, the first expansion for Cyberpunk, is coming. Is it even coming this year? I don't think anyone would be shocked to find out it has a target of a 2023 release date, but either way, I'm very excited. Obviously, there's a lot of announcements to be made. We know E3 is kind of canceled now, but with one of these other summer conferences, perhaps Cyberpunk and CDPR will have some things to announce. And who knows, maybe we'll even see some new features come with this next next big patch, but again, I have a feeling that we're going to get some smaller patches before anything huge. But we'll find out more soon, or at least some more, as on April 14th is CD Projekt Red's earning call for the second half of 2021, the end of their 2021 fiscal year. These earnings calls have been a very valuable point to get new information, and I doubt this one will be any different, especially considering this is the first earnings call after patch 1.5 and after the announcement of all future projects on Unreal Engine 5 and this partnership with Epic Games. I'm going to bring you guys an update on whatever they announce during that, but with that said, as always, again, I thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I hope to see you all next time. Later.